Claude Code can run your entire business. Here's how. All right, this is in response to a LinkedIn post that I made, and it was talking about right now most people use Claude Code, which is an agentic harness by Anthropic for development, which is what it's made for, but it's incredibly flexible to write any kind of document, to write emails, to, as I was saying here, create meeting reports, agendas, strategies, whatever. I mean, these are all files, right? Not really anything more than that. And so as long as you have the connector, which is most of it is MCP. So I have, for example, linear all product development tool hooked up via MCP, or an API, of course, that you can wrap into your own MCP. I mean, it's not rocket science, right? The more things you can obviously connect. And for me, this is interesting because Claude Code is probably the first agentic harness that I actually trust to do good work on. People have been talking about agents for last year, probably. And then, yeah, the implementation was just bad, but Claude Code is really, really good. And obviously there's other agentic harnesses there are maybe slightly cheaper and also good. But yeah, I've been using Claude Code just because there's something new every 2 days, and so far nothing has been 10x better for me to do the switch. But obviously I keep trying things out and seeing what's out there. But yeah. So what I wanted to do today is I just wanted to show you one process that I just literally ran through that I do very often, and it's a boring process, but it should give you some ideas what's possible. And then we can see how we could take that even further. So I use Claude Code usually within Warp, which also has agentic coding and agentic things, but it's usually just for me to launch Claude Code. That's what I use it for, but they've been trying to push it really, really hard, which is in itself interesting that everyone, for some reason, trying to be the same thing. But that's just a sign of our times. And so what I do, I will use something like Monologue by Every to transcribe a message, right? So I'm mostly talking to my computer when I'm in Claude Code, and I will just do a brain dump. That's very, very simple for me to communicate. Of course, it's not good to communicate with another person, but it's a very good way to communicate with AI because it will usually mean that you give more context, because we're lazy. We don't want to type. So if you type, you often are too brief. And if you talk, you throw in more context. Obviously, just how I am. If you meet me in person, I tend to go down all these rabbit holes and all these rants. So this is just a very natural way for me to communicate. But again, we need to be mindful of who's on the other end. So if there's a document that needs to be created, we can't have complete chaos throwing at someone. So what I do is I go in here and I do a brain dump. Right now, what I was thinking about is essentially how back with farming, when everyone was farming their own food, we would be all like solopreneurs essentially. And in the last 200 years or whatever, you had probably more division of labor. We've had gatekeepers, capitalists, the ones being able to afford, funding a company. And I think we're seeing a shift towards more solopreneur people working for themselves, either because there's just no job for them. They want to go out and do things by themselves. And so essentially what that is for me is a very interesting shift, because we're, for example, working on an operating system built on this Claude Code idea here. And that means that there'll be potentially more customers or more people that would be able to leverage this operating system because it's optimized for small companies, right? But that isn't really the idea. So essentially we go in and I drop that, and then it goes in and it knows where to drop this as an insight so that I have a document that I can keep revisiting, right? And then I have this set up as a Git repository, which means it will then go and commit if I ask it to, right? I can go in and create a pull request. And that is a very natural way for me to review a document. And I can also go in and ask the agent from Claude Code that lives within GitHub. So I've installed the GitHub app to make changes, or I can make changes myself, right? So, but it's just a very natural way for me to review a document. And then I can obviously go in here. It gives me a sort of summary, but I could go in here, right? And then say, hey, draft me an email or whatever MCP you have hooked up. Right now, I have a couple. I have my own that's essentially just utilities and documents that live there. I have Context 7 for documentation. I have Linear for product development, and then V0, which for some reason has never worked for me, and Linear is disconnected. I don't really know why. But in the last couple of days, Claude Code has been pretty wonky with like authentication, so it keeps telling me I'm logged out. So that might be an issue here. That's not really what we're going to focus on. But essentially, one other thing I often do is essentially to feedback or challenge what I'm doing, right? So essentially I could say, hey, let's just use O3. And this is something I've exposed via the Claude Code, where the Claude and Steroids MCP. So I've built a small utility that I can call O3 through, which means you can just very easily create your own. It's not very hard. There's also a bunch of third-party, marketplaces for MCPs, although I would be careful that it's like legit. So I would always prefer official MCP if it's possible, or just to make your own. Rep some API. There's tools that will help you with the authentication, which I think is probably the hardest part for MCP. Everything else is very, very simple. So I usually, if I need to make changes to my MCP, I'll just have Claude Code do it because it's like very, very simple. But yeah, so this Claude Storage has a couple of things like for documents, for running models that I don't have access to through Claude Code. So it'll be O3 or GPT-5 or Perplexity if I need to do deep research. Let's see what O3 has to say. All right. So with O3, I usually will either do very, very specific changes to code that even Opus can do because it shits the bed, or critical takes on something because it's very, very good at doing that. So essentially what it says here, we have cherry-picked examples. We have sectors where we just can't compete as a small team, right? AI also helps large companies. We have new specialization essentially emerging, which makes sense. We have sector bias, low capital, low regulation, compliance. Okay, yeah, so these are actually not to be forgotten about. And essentially we're building on top of old money institutions, right? So I guess it did a pretty good job. And my take, as I said, just started as a very naive brainstorm, just something I popped into my head, and I agree that it is more nuanced than that, but obviously nobody wants nuance, right? Some nuance is good. Now I can basically say, hey, it asks me like, what do you want to do with this? And it says counter argument sections, refine, rebuttal. Let's refine it. And what we'll do to show that it's not just an assistant, but like more of an agentic workflow. And I could be doing this in a complete process, right? So I can make a command here that will let me do this automatically. Basically the kind of challenge and refine loop, I can always do that, right? Automatically, which you start as an assistant because it's a back and forth, but you have the option to go fully agentic and have it do multiple things in a row, which I think that's where Claude Code is like perfect, right? Because it combines both. Again, there's others as well, right? So instead of having it commit immediately to master, which is just documents, nothing's gonna break, but essentially I want to review and I want to be able to make some changes as well, just to show off how I use it once PRs are up, for example. But yeah, for that, you need to run install GitHub app. It will walk you through. It's very, very simple. So nothing to see there. Another command I have is essentially loading context, which means that it will go through, and that will just load all the documents that I have laid out into context that are relevant to whatever task I'm trying to do. So if I'm doing a strategy, I wanted to load the existing strategy, of course. I wanted to load our insights. I wanted to load our thesis or whatever helps to make a better strategy out of the box, which is something I think that a lot of people are just not good at, to give good context. This is a very easy way to do it. And so you can seed the conversation with the necessary context to get a very, very good, result out of the box. And again, here, this is an agentic workflow where it goes and it reasons and I just tell it what I want to do, and then we'll go in and we'll figure out which files to load, and it will give me an overview. So if I think it forgot something, I always have the option to overwrite. That is part of your video, a different video topic I'll do another time. So while this happens, you can also already go in and you can stir it a different way, right? So I see, again, very natural way for me to look at changes. This was removed. Anything red, new line is green. So if you're a developer, you're very familiar with this because this is how GitHub works essentially, or how GitHub shows changes. And so if I see it doing something stupid, I can already go in and I can always overwrite, because I am in the driver's seat right now. Obviously, this is different once you run these as agents or you run these in the background. Then you need to look more at the end deliverable. But this I found to be very, very important for when it writes code. So I never really just have like 10 agents running at the same time doing code changes. I think that's when you get into fucking hell, because you lose track which thread you are on, the context, you keep context switching essentially, which makes, I think, the end result worse. And often, especially if it's a hard thing to do, like a hard code change, it will be bad results. I'll do this like the same here for editing documents or whatever. It's the same thing. Just because you're never fully in one context, you're just switching around all the time. And if there is something that I want the agent to run purely in the background, it will either be completely automated, but these are more static things, not code, where I know a lot of things can go wrong. But let's say meeting summarization or document creation or whatever. And now it's going to create a pull request for us, or add these files first to commit them. I think there's something it can do purely alone. I will just use the GitHub agent to do it, because then I don't need to set up a work tree. I don't need to make sure to merge the work tree again, all this kind of crap, which is completely possible to do in your console. Why would I do it if I can just spin up the agent there and have it do its thing? Downside is that you can't easily provide context to the agent other than the ticket on GitHub. So you need to make sure that your tickets are very, very good. You can skip all these things if you just run it with no permissions or dangerous permissions or something. Dangerously skip permissions. Pull request. In that pull request will show me again what's been deleted, what's been changed. Okay, so we've added a big section about where does this apply, and now I can go in and can make comments here. If you're a developer, you know this, but essentially you will mark certain lines and will say, here, I want something else to happen. Right? Let's try something else. We'll go in and we'll say, pick something. Right, this is good. I'll just do a very small change. Let's do line. He's at Claude. And we'll have Claude agent make changes. You can see here that it's seen it and it's going to start working on it. This is obviously a very small and very dumb change. This is how usually I will end up. You can see here now, often working on code changes just by mentioning Claude and combining agentic coding or agentic experiences where you're in the driver's seat and you're using harness. It's all on your computer versus an agent versus vibe coding tools. Each have their own place in the process, and right now for me it isn't as much about automation as it is to learn and keep up to date with where to use which tool. And it's just like automation in general. You'll pick one use case after the next once you know how it works, since you've reverse engineered the process, once you've codified the process. And most people are trying to either skip step and just automate everything as usual, because like it's AI and AI can do everything, right? Like it's very broad technology. Or there's a lot of people out there that will tell you that that's possible, but they've never done any of this themselves, which is in itself quite bad. So this is something to be aware of. And it's probably something you should learn yourself by just using the tool, where the strengths and the weaknesses are of each tool and how to use it properly. I mean, this is all nothing new, right? This used to be only delegate tasks you understand, learn yourself, then hire someone to run it for you, these kind of things, right? So it's just more important to learn these tools because they have this much leverage. It's this much more leverage if you can get this down and can get this automated with AI than doing it yourself or delegating small tasks here and there. So it's definitely worth it. Probably more worth it than it's been before, essentially. Let's see. All right, so it did a good job. Kind of just a very simple change. It committed it to the same pull request, and now we're having code review run here as well. So it will just go in and will give me feedback on reviewing its own change, basically. This comes with the GitHub app as well. So those two things, just mentioning Claude, having it do changes, and then also the pull request, and you have control over it as a GitHub action to change the prompt that runs when the action is triggered. And overall, these have been working very well for us. Play around with it, figure out what works for you, and then go deep on that. And that's work nobody can really take away from you. They can kind of guide you, they can hold your hand, but ultimately you need to understand this because it's such a broad technology and like a wide-ranging impact that it has that you shouldn't leave this to anyone else but yourself. All right, this was a bit more of an in-depth video. I hope it was interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think, what you've done with Claude Code, any use cases I don't see that are possible. Very, very interested in leveling up my own skill set as well. But if not, let me know what other part of this, because I went pretty far down the rabbit hole, you would like to see its own video on. Maybe the 3 stages of agentic, coding or whatever. Up to you. Just let me know. All right. Cheers.